it worries me very much indeed. I was a soldier, but I worked extensively with the Royal Air Force, and it was always noticeable to me that whilst the Army and the Navy continued to talk about guardsmen and about stokers and the rest of it, the Royal Air Force already had the titles, the ranks of airmen and airwomen. Now, that was something which might have sounded a little clumsy at first, but you got very, very used to it. The fact remains that those titles have been all part of the DNA of the Royal Air Force. They've been part of their history since 1st of April 1918, I believe, when it was formed. So why do we need to replace them? If the Army said, well, we're not going to have guardsmen, we're going to have guardsmen and guardswomen or guardees or something like that, well, I would still oppose it, but I would follow the logic of it. The Royal Air Force are already there with airmen and airwomen. Aviators, I'm sorry, I don't agree with the Air Vice or the Chief of the Air Staff, I do beg your pardon. Aviator sounds to me like someone that takes to the air. And the majority of the Royal Air Force, for perfectly good reasons, do not fly.
Do you think within this, I mean, I have no idea what's happening at the MOD, what the internal politics are, but I note that the person who's announced this, ultimately the head of the RAF, recently was talking about the target of being carbon neutral in the RAF by 2040. I mean, there's a sense in which you can maybe make a few headlines, create a few headlines by grasping the nettle of political correctness or going green.
Yeah, this is just wokery. They're trying to outwoke one another, the Royal Navy, the Army and the Royal Air Force. I'm sure they'll be dropping the titles Royal fairly shortly. Your last speaker, I thought, made the point extremely well. Warfare is tough. Warfare is difficult, and warfare is about killing people and not getting killed yourself. That's why our airmen, women, stokers, riflemen, grenadier guardsmen, whatever, that's why they draw their pay. It's not about worrying about the next cartridge, the next cartridge that you fire is going to be carbon neutral. It's not, you're not worrying about the blood that you spill is going to contaminate the atmosphere somehow. It's about getting on with the job and completely ignoring the woke nonsense which seems to be infecting the whole of our society and, sadly, our armed forces.
As in many things, America seems further down the evolutionary track on this one too. And what's happening to their military is really exciting a lot of commentary, a lot of it negative. And in particular, this idea that, well, you mentioned the esprit de corps and the camaraderie that the armed forces need. And if you're constantly lecturing people about white privilege and white fragility, critical race theory, all that stuff, then there's partly a function of that is that you spend less time doing the stuff you should be doing. You're spending time being lectured at in a classroom rather than training to do other things like killing people on behalf of the defence of your realm. And there is that aspect too, which is you are potentially just setting up one soldier against another. They stop looking at each other as comrades and colleagues and men and women they're prepared to fight and die for, but as people who are defined by the colour of their skin, by identity politics.
I'm not sure I completely agree with you on this, Colin. I think the United States forces were a pretty good bastion of common sense and non-wokery when certainly the British forces were moving very much in front of them with all of this sort of nonsense. That really has pertained, I think, in the US forces until the handover from Donald Trump to Mr. Biden. And now suddenly they're trying to catch up. Now, I'm not sure whether this is an urban rumour, whether it's just a myth or not, but I was told that during the crucial run-up to the disgraceful scuttling out of Afghanistan recently, that actually the US Army had spent more time worrying about Pride Week than it had about preparing for the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Now, if that's true, that says it all. Our priorities are completely wrong. We need to get on with defending and, if necessary, killing, not worrying about how many earrings a soldier, sailor or airman can wear in the future.
And Patrick, just before we let you go, just on the sort of green dimension to this, I was talking last week to Sebastian Gorka, former Donald Trump advisor, about this specific point, because the argument cuts both ways, doesn't it? So there are occasions when going green is helpful. I mean, if you have the example we cited last week was a reconnaissance vehicle. If it's got an electric engine, it may be stealthier. So it doesn't always follow that just by being green makes you less combat effective. But you're certainly going to find yourself facing enemies who will be less scrupulous about what powers their tanks, their ships, their planes?
I've spent in the past quite a lot of time in Russia, Colin. And if you look at their armed forces, they're a country with a much smaller GDP than we have and much larger armed forces. There's absolutely no place for wokery inside their armed forces. They concentrate on one thing and one thing only, and that is defending their country and, if necessary, fighting and dying. Now, I don't know what their attitude is towards green issues, but all I would say is that if we are wasting our time concentrating on that sort of stuff, then our potential enemies, not saying that Russia is necessarily an enemy, but our potential enemies, believe me, are not even giving it a second's thought.
Patrick Mercer, really good to talk to you. Thanks very much.